we're talking about the signs of function values, which one's positive, which one's negative, and where. And so it's impossible to talk about that without talking about the quadrants. We're going to be talking about quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4, because sometimes sine will be positive and sometimes sine will be negative. Same thing with cosine and tangent and all of them. Okay? One of them is easy. Quadrant 1 is easy because they're all positive. So we can go ahead and fill out all of them right there. We already know all of the trig functions are positive in the first quadrant. Don't forget that. That's the easy one. Okay? But that's, that's the only easy one. So I want to show you how I remembered it when I was in school. I remembered that sine goes with y. Okay? That's something that you should already know. Sine goes with y. And so think about which quadrants have positive y values. Which quadrants have positive y values? 1 and 2. Okay? So since sine goes with y, and y is positive in quadrants 1 and 2, then I would know sine is positive in quadrants 1 and 2. Therefore, it would be negative in quadrants 3 and 4. And, that's kind of how I visualized it. This is kind of how I visualized it when I was in school. I'll show you that and another way later. As for cosine, we don't really need that. But cosine is talking about x. And so when I talk about cosine, I'm talking about, come on, it's not going to work for me, is it? That's not what I wanted. Oh, there it is. When I talk about cosine, I'm talking about the x values. So look at where the x values are positive. Where are the x values? Which quadrants have positive x values? 1 and 4, right? Quadrants 1 and 4 are going to have positive x numbers, right? And so that's what I remembered. I remembered for cosine, which went with the x, quadrants 1 and 4 had positive x numbers, okay? Sine goes with y, cosine goes with x. And so, when you're visualizing this, you can see that quadrants 2 and 3 have the negative values for x right there, okay? Everything else, literally everything else, plays off of x and y. Everything else plays off of sine and cosine. So if I was looking at this, I don't know that you need to overlap these like that, but if you overlap them, okay. Okay. See how quadrant 1, the x's are positive and the y's are positive? Okay. That's kind of how we're going to figure out tangent, because we remembered that tangent was y over x. We knew that ratio from the other day. Tangent is y over x. So really, all you'd have to do is take the y over the x, and you're going to get a positive value here. Okay? If you took this y in the second quadrant over this x in the second quadrant, you'd have a positive divided by a negative. What's that result going to be? Negative. Okay? So that's going to be negative. And if you look at this picture, you see the reds are positives and the blues are negatives. If it's y over x, you're dividing a positive over a negative. Okay? Anywhere there's not a match, I guess, is going to be a negative. You've got a plus, you've got a minus. When you divide those, that's going to be a minus. Okay? So if I look at the third quadrant here, the third quadrant, the y value is negative and the x value is negative. Well, what happens when you divide a negative by a negative?
Positive.
That's positive. And so I would know that the tangent in the third quadrant is positive, and the fourth quadrant makes me divide a negative by a positive. What's negative divided by positive? Negative. Okay, so it's negative. And again, if you look at this picture, in the fourth quadrant, you can see that you're going to have a y value that's negative, and you're dividing by an x value that's positive. That's going to give you a negative overall value. So everything plays off of sine and cosine. We know that sine and cosecant are reciprocals. Sine and cosecant are reciprocals. So sine and cosecant would have identical positive, negative values. We know that cosine and secant are reciprocals. And so cosine and secant would have identical values. We know that tangent and cotangent are reciprocals, and so tangent and cotangent would have identical positives and negatives. All right? That's kind of how I remember it. I was able to figure out sine and cosine off of just x and y values. I'm not going to ask you to memorize this chart. I don't want to memorize this chart. I don't think it's necessary. But this is something that's going to be important. It's going to be important that you can tell me that cotangent is negative in the second quadrant. Okay? Or secant is positive in the first quadrant. Just things like that are going to be kind of important. So there's another way of doing it, and I think this chart is a little bit overcomplicated. But basically, remember the saying, all students take calculus. It's like a little mnemonic device. All students take calculus. Okay? That's maybe a shortcut. All, the A in all stands for all functions are positive. All of them are positive. And here's a shortcut. All students take calculus. You might just write that in the top corner of your page or something like that. But A stands for all, and all of them are positive. S stands for sine. And so when I look at sine, and I know sine goes with cosecant, sine and cosecant are positive. The T stands for tangent. So I know tangent and its reciprocal cotangent are positive. The C here stands for, the C in calculus stands for cosine. Cosine and secant are positive. So if you can make heads or tails of this chart, that might be a shortcut and a quick way for you to remember which ones are positive